We're in the series of how do we as broken people, the walking wounded, how do we move through life wounded ourselves as we encounter those who are perhaps less or even more wounded than we are. How do we do that? The language of the church is very clear on how to and why to accept Jesus, but unfortunately a lot of times it seems to be a little idealistic and not realistic. And we kneel at the altar and we pray, we accept Jesus in our hearts, and then our lives are still tough. How do we, as people who believe that Jesus is working in us, how do we give that some time in the midst of a broken world? So, what we're going to look at today is, oh my, what's that doing up there? We're going to look at addiction. And when I was you talk to your friends, and you've got friends that just really love TV shows, and I love TV shows. I'm one of those friends for other people. And it's like, hey, have you seen this? And of course, this show is no longer on the air. You can only watch it like on Netflix or something, which is how I'm watching it. And let me just tell you, if you're like, oh, I'm always up for a new TV show, if your idea of a good night of TV is a couple of reruns of Andy Griffith and some Lawrence Welk, this show is not for you. Okay? I'm just being real. This is an edgy, gritty, realistic, for the brokenness of the world kind of show. So that's how I want to begin this morning. So I start watching Breaking Bad, and of course it's about drug use, and it's about tragedy, and about all these things, and I'm only like 3 episodes in, so shh. No spoilers, please. And but I wanted to kind of share some of these thoughts as we gather together, because we're going to talk about the brokenness of addiction. So this is kind of our starting point of journeying together. Now, the scripture is supposed to be for today is Mark chapter 10. I'm not going to read through that whole thing for you. It's the passage where Jesus says it's easier for a camel to fit through the eye of the needle than for a rich person to get into heaven. Remember that the eye of the needle was a smaller gate in the city of Jerusalem in its walls, and it was they didn't allow the livestock or beasts of burden through in that area. So it was more like a rule-based thing than it was a actual. You ever see the old Saturday Night Live sketch where Chevy Chase is in a laboratory and he's trying to figure out how to shrink camels so they fit through the needles so rich people can go to heaven? Maybe not. I should have had that up on the screen. That would have been cool. Too bad I didn't think about that. Anyway, the idea is that it all ends up in this moment where it kind of climaxes to this moment where Jesus says nothing is impossible with God. And as we're talking about addiction, as we're talking about the sort of things that plague us, that plague our families, it's an incredibly poignant reminder. All things are possible with God. So, as we talk about this, if I mention addiction, perhaps things like Breaking Bad and meth use, especially in Jefferson County, Indiana, comes to mind. But if I ask you, what pops into your head when I say addiction? What kind of things do you think of? Just say them out loud. Perhaps not at the exact same time, so I can't understand what anybody's saying. Gambling? So this kind of stuff. Prescription drugs, crack, meth, alcohol, cigarettes, all those things that are dirty little habits that just completely can wreck our lives. We know of these things in a clinical sense. We understand how they're dangerous in a clinical sense. Our own families have been ripped apart. Friendships ended. I mean, all kinds of horrible things in terms of our own personal experience. All of us in some way, shape, or form have been affected by addiction. But there's something really interesting about our culture because we understand this, we know this, we're sensitive to this, we are not flippant about it. Sometimes I think we're a little too callous to people who are addicted that do some very unfortunate things. I think we could be a little more compassionate. But other than that, we're right on understanding that it's a terrible road, and we have a lot of compassion for families and things that go through that. So we understand this is some real hard stuff. But then we look at the stuff that we often call addictions. I'm a chocolate addict. I have to have chocolate. What did you give up for Lent this year? Chocolate. What did you do on Easter? I ate chocolate. Because I'm a chocolate addict. I love it. I got to have my coffee. If I don't have my coffee, bad things will happen. I must have a caffeine addiction. I love books. I'm a book addict. French fries. I got to have French fries. Donuts. Facebook. All those other things. The stuff that I didn't even put up there. all kinds of things that we say we're addicted to. So I got to thinking, what is real addiction? We understand this clinical sense where we really want to give people help. And then there's these other conversational things where we just throw the word addiction around like it's two different kinds of things. But is it? Here's what the dictionary.com says to us about what addiction really is. It says, addiction is the state of being enslaved to a habit or practice or to something that is psychologically or physically habit-forming, as narcotics, to such an extent that its cessation or quitting it causes severe trauma. Anything you do that forms a habit, and then if you tried to quit, would just completely rip you apart. That is addiction. Some of you are going, yep, still sounds like coffee. I mean, really. I mean, sometimes those other things work that way too. But in the year 1600, the definition was an awarding or a devoting. Prior to this newer definition, it was understood that anything that had addictive qualities to it was something that you awarded. Well, what does that mean? When you award something, you place it as the highest priority in your life. Now, because we understand newer chemicals, newer things that are so much more habit-forming, that's going to be kind of the key, is how easy is it to create a habit doing this. Then it's incredible. But before that was inclination, kind of like you're inclined to go take a walk. I believe I'm addicted to go take a walk now. And look at that, how that escalates. I'm inclined, I've awarded, and I've devoted. It almost sounds kind of noble, doesn't it? I've devoted. I've addicted my life to this principle, to the state of being a slave in such a way that it's habit-forming, and if I try to quit, it'll rip my life apart. Oh, by the way, if I keep doing it, it's ripping my life apart. So I want to talk about a couple of things this morning. As we look to these together, I want you to look up on the screen, and I want you to see 3 brains. The first one is normal. The second one is just after the person has ingested cocaine. And the second one is after a person has just eaten a high-sugar carb meal that made them happy. The brain on the left is the normal. See the little red area? The brains on the right are brain scans that do not show that red area near as much, but what I want you to see is they look almost identical between cocaine and carbs. Your brain does not care if there's any difference between cocaine and an awful lot of spaghetti. Your brain releases dopamine, which gives you your high. Okay? It doesn't care what it is. Now, I want you to also remember, I'm not saying that all things are equal, because then we have the habit-forming part. You can't forget that, because cocaine is far more habit-forming in a way and much harder to stop than, trying to go on a low-carb diet or something like that. But I want you to understand the way we're wired is how easy it is for this. You've heard the phrase he's just got an addictive personality. Friends, I'm here to say theologically we all have addictive personalities because our brains are all wired pretty much the same way. We all look to lessen pain, and we'll do anything that we can to lessen it. If we're raised in a loving Christian home, we may turn to something that's less harmful than someone who's cast out on the streets who has no hope. Their idea of finding an end to the pain might be incredibly harsh and far more habit-forming than someone else in a different circumstance. So the notion of, there are those people, there's those druggies, those because they're other. They're different. They're somebody that's almost subhuman and not like me at all. But what I want you to understand from today's time together is that we are all human beings and we are all children of God and we are all made in the image of God. And this brain image helps us to understand that our struggles, although not as habit-forming or as toxic, are very similar. We are all trying to stifle our pain. So, let's go back to the definition again. The state of being enslaved to a habit or a practice or to something that is psychologically or physically habit-forming as narcotics to such an extent that its cessation to quit it causes severe trauma. What does the Bible have to say? Well, if you remember, in Exodus, there was this time when Moses is playing secretary to God. And he goes up Mount Sinai, and he's not writing on papyrus or paper. He's writing on what? Stone tablets. That's right. He's writing on stone tablets, and he's writing down He's writing down what? What's he writing down? The 10 Commandments. You're exactly right. So Moses is writing down the 10 Commandments, and it is finally going to be the loving boundaries that Judaism will now form itself around. It's the 10 Commandments that will now order them and make them understand, where are my boundaries? How am I supposed to live as a human being? But Moses took a long time. I'm guessing it does take a while to hammer in those things. I don't know why he didn't write it down first and then say, God, when I get down the mountain, I'll have somebody else hammer them in the stone. I don't know. I don't know how that works. What I do know is the people down the mountain got really sick and tired of waiting, so they come up to Aaron. They come up to Aaron and they say, hey, is Moses down yet? And Aaron's like, no, I mean, cloud's still up there and rumblings and crazy things going on, so I guess he's still up there. He's not come down yet. You know, while we're waiting, there's a group of us, we thought it would be a really good idea, because we don't know how to do this God stuff that Moses wants us to do, but we know how to party. So we thought, just while we're waiting, we've gathered all the gold in camp, and if you could cast for us a golden calf, we could really spend the time a little more constructively waiting for Moses. So Aaron's like, I don't know. Moses was pretty strict when he said what we were supposed to be doing, and I don't think this really fits. Like, oh, come on, Aaron. It'll be fun. So he does it, and he creates the golden calf. And Moses comes down, and he goes, oh, great, I'm so happy you guys are having a party. No. What's he do to those tablets that he's painstakingly worked on for I don't know how many days at this point? What's he do with them? Smashes them. He is so angry by the selfishness of the people without the faith to understand. Now, we can cut them a little slack because they really didn't understand God. They only understood God in terms of, what's in it for me? Oh, you delivered me from Egypt. I'll wait a few days before I try something else. Thanks, God. Or whatever you are. Mysterious being in a cloud that parted the Red Sea and took all Pharaoh's armies and drowned them. No. They tried, and they said, our way is better. I know better than Moses. We know how to do the golden calf parties. This God stuff in the mountain, mysterious, weirdo, mumbo jumbo, we don't know how to do that. So let's do what we know how to do. And they had parties, and all kinds of horrible things happened, and they did all kinds of unspeakable things. And it wasn't pleasing. It's idolatry. It's idolatry. Now, I know and I believe that Moses just got another copy of the same things, but I wonder if he hammered in, thou shalt not have any gods before me, a little harder when he went back up. Don't you wonder? Because an idol is putting anything in life. It doesn't have to be made of gold and shaped like a cow, although those of us who love brisket, it could get there fast. We find that anything can take a place on the top shelf in our life if we allow it. It is not hard, and it should be, but it's not because God loves us and gave us free will. It should be harder to move God off of that top space. Because what happens is it's not instant. We say, oh, this is so important, and I need it to be temporarily, Lord. Temporarily. I need it just to be important for today. So you're going to be number 2 just for today, Lord. But it becomes so easy for us to think, well, God delivered us from slavery in Egypt. It's going to be pretty easy to know that God will always be there for us. So if I need to put God to number 3 for just a week, God can handle that. And at what point do we as believers in Jesus stop putting God at a lower spot? We differentiate between our church and our God. Well, you see, my God is my personal relationship with Jesus. And when I read the scriptures in my home, that's my relationship with Jesus. My church is my gathering of people of a like-minded understanding of Jesus, and we hang out together. But those things are different. We start justifying our priorities because we've taken God off the number 1 rung. Now, you know what story that is without looking? Luke 8. Jesus and the disciples get in a boat, and they go across the sea, and they get to the other side of the sea, and there's a parade of people going, oh, Jesus, we love you. Please speak to us your truth about God. No, it's a naked guy in chains. That's what they see. It's a guy who has had such a hard time fitting in culturally, fitting in behaviorally in his village, that they have shackled him And he becomes so wild, he breaks the chains and strips his clothes off and runs loose into the wilderness. We understand through Scripture, because Luke tells us why he is the way he is, that he has done something in life to invite so many demons inside of him that when Jesus talks to the demons to pull them out of him, he says, "Who are you?" And they say, "You know what, Jesus? There's so many of us. We don't really have this kind of time. We don't want to take too much of your time up. Just call us Legion, because there's so many of us." And then he throws them into what? What's he throw them into? Another barbecue animal. Pigs. Remember swine flu? Like swine flu? He throws them into the pigs, and the pigs jump off of the cliff and are killed. Which there's another story behind that on how hated Jesus was by the Gentile farmers that lost their entire crop of pigs, all their livestock in that one day. But we'll save for another time. But if I was to ask you, what do you think it was like to be this young man's parent? What do you think it was like to be that possessed man's friend? What do you think it was like to be in a friendship, in a relationship with him? I don't know that much about demon possession. I don't know if it's instantaneous or if it begins to happen over time. I don't know what happened, but I think you could probably say there was an enslavement going on. I mean, he literally had chains on, didn't he? So as we begin to try and unpack this in terms of, we don't really understand demon possession the way that first century world did, but we understand addiction, or we try to. Well, let me do it this way. Here are before and after mugshots of people addicted to methamphetamine. Do you think the possessed man that Jesus saved, that Jesus loved, that Jesus nurtured and brought back into fullness into his home, do you think that man looked anything like he did before? I mean, do you think he wore a nice suit and had his hair combed and was nice and shaved and his beard was trimmed? No. He was wild. He was covered in filth. If he had any clothing on at all, he was shackled. He barely could speak. He was enslaved. And he is the image of the possessed. He is the image of the addicted. He is the image of searching for something and finding the wrong thing in the wrong place at the wrong time and thinking at some point it was a good idea. What is it that we do in life where we can invite the demonic in? I don't know. I don't care to know. I just know if I focus on Jesus, I'm good. So at some point, he turned away from God and he decided that God didn't need to be important in his life, and so he tried other things to put them up there. There were drugs in first century world. There was, in the Mediterranean society, there were things he could have done to try and dull his pain. And at some point, he probably said, "Devil, take me, because I have nowhere else to go." And the demons were happy to oblige. There might have been some kind of cultic worship service he got into where he invited those things in. But the bottom line was, at some point, he started something that became habit-forming, was incredibly toxic, and he didn't even have the power to try and quit. It took Jesus, for all things are possible with God. These are the demoniacs in our world. These are the people that, to alleviate the stress from their poverty, try a cheap and accessible, incredibly habit-forming drug. These are the people that we as the city say it is best for them to go outside and be chained so that we do not have to deal with their wildness and their ugliness. These are the people that Jesus greets first when he comes to see us. So what does that mean for us? How is it that we are supposed to treat the least among us? Where is the compassion? Where is the understanding? Where are we called to be? First, we have to understand this and understand it very clearly, that addiction itself is not sin. Take it to the bank. Addiction is not sin. Addiction is possibly because of the broken state caused by sin. I decide, you know what, I can try this once. It's not going to hurt me. I'm prideful. Sin of pride, take a highly addictive substance that is easily habit-forming, and I'm down a horrible road, right? You take all these different kinds of things that hammer us in life. I mean, even to the point of I've been beaten down so much and told I'm so worthless so often, I believe it, so I don't care. At what point I don't know where the sinful blame is on the person who's hurting or the person who's receiving and then gives in, I don't know. But it all starts in the same place. Just like the brain scan that says it doesn't really matter what chemical you're using, your brain reacts the same way. It doesn't matter who you are. If you are raised in an unloving environment, you will turn to whatever you can to ease the pain. If you are in a stressful environment, it does not matter what tax level you are taxed at. You will go to ease the pain. So as Christians, what stories are we telling? What ways are we engaging our society to say, I understand. Maybe not exactly where your pain is, but I understand the need to cover pain, to alleviate pain. I have a different kind of pain. I try to alleviate it in other ways. And Jesus says, hey, all of you who are tired and have a heavy burden, come here. He says, come to me, but he means come here, listen to what I have to say so you can put me back at the top so everything else can be where it needs to be. Do it that way. Let's close this morning. The early Methodists were a class, and I don't mean that they were like upper class or whatever. They were literally a class meeting. They gathered in a little room, and they sat at tables or chairs in a circle, and John Wesley, the first one who started it, looked at him and he said, how is it with your soul? He didn't mince words. He didn't go, so how's the job? How's the kids? You know, that kind of stuff that we do with each other. You're like, how these superficial things. He goes, how is it with your soul? Because all that other stuff, you know, that's fine. That's who you are, and I'm interested in that. But if your soul is harsh, that other stuff's not going to last much longer. So let's deal with the important stuff. And so what happened is over time, Methodist people got together in these classes, and they were from different denominations. They were mostly Anglicans for Church of England. Then once they came over here, there were so many people hungry to sit in a circle together and talk about how much pain they really had in their lives that they began to systematically put together, as Wesley did. Wesley wrote a book, a pamphlet actually, called Physique. And it wasn't about how buff he was and how much he lifted. It was about how to understand the ailments of the human body in a spiritual way. To understand that there are chemicals and there are things we need to do to take care of our bodies, but there's also an understanding of depravity in our hearts and our souls that needs to be met. So as Wesley began doing this, he was doing an early model of therapy. And he began to pray with people. And instead of just saying, you know, you need to stop drinking, Bob. And Bob would say, hey, I've tried. I don't know how to stop. Wesley goes, so how does that happen? He goes, I do it every day. He goes, well, how is it? He goes, well, I go to work, and on my way home, I pass this pub, and I can't stop from going in. So I go inside, and I drink until I run out of money or they quit giving them to me. And I've lost my wife, my family, and I'm at the bottom. So someone looks over it, and John says, Paul, don't you live over in the same area as Bob? And Paul says, sure, I do. And John says, Paul, why don't you, because of your schedule, why don't you meet him at the end of work and walk him home? You see, friends, addiction is also ritualistic. When I was in a class for understanding addiction therapy and helping people who are addicted, we had a presenter, and she came in and she said, you know, I'm an alcoholic. And she said, I understood my alcoholism once I understood that it was religious. And of course, we were like, what? And of course, I'm thinking idolatry, right? And she goes, no, it's ritual. I would drive to work the same way, at the same time every day. I would walk out to about the same parking spot. I would drive the same route home from work. I would go to the same liquor store, go to the same shelf, go to the same cashier, buy the same item, go home on the same road, park in the same parking area in my apartment complex, go up the same set of stairs, go in, put my alcohol in the refrigerator, fix myself a drink, sit in the same chair, and watch the same TV. She goes, it was like Every time it was the same. So I had to break the ritual to be able to break the addiction. So she stopped driving to work the same way. She stopped going to the liquor store. She stopped sitting in the same chair in her home. And when she went to go get a drink because she was so habitually stuck, she would find a spare book from AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, that reminded her she didn't drink anymore. She said, we have to understand the way we're wired and to understand that this is not something easy to stop, but we have to see it as something that Christ can help deliver us from if we will change what we're worshiping, change what it is, and let him set us free from the enslavement. So the early Methodists, those class meetings eventually became groups like Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, where people would sit in a circle or in a room together and they would be honest. They'd use the anonymity to help make sure that people would feel comfortable sharing. But that model of our tradition was to say, you know what? We're not going to compartmentalize our lives in such a way that we can't deal with our problems. So this morning, our heritage is incredibly rich. But will we reach back and reclaim it? Will we trust one another to sit together and tell the truth about our pain? Will we be able to, in our brokenness, trust someone else to walk with them in theirs and vice versa? Or will we just continue to be enslaved, terrified that if we try to change anything, it'll traumatically destroy us? There is hope. And when we put Christ back, it will all begin to be better one day at a time. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Spirit.